All right. So, let me stop staring at myself. Cool. So, I didn't really get a chance to sort of catch up with you all in the last one. I kind of went right through the announcements and things like that. Hopefully, you all are doing okay. I've heard from quite a few all and about some, I don't know, differing, changing situations at home and stuff like that. Please, um, keep open communication if something comes up. If you need to turn something in a day late, to be honest, I'm gonna be frank with you all. I don't really care. Um, I don't really care about due dates if it's something that is affecting you and something that's making you anxious or something like that. Please just let me know. That way I can sort of um, help you sort of get through it and still learn something this semester and be able to apply your knowledge. Updates from me this week. Let's see. My hair is growing a little bit. I'm a little bit scared that it's not going to grow in the directions I want it to grow, but we shall see. At this point, I feel like all three sides of my head are the same length, which means that they're going to grow at the same length, and that's going to make me look kind of odd. If by the end of the semester I end up looking like, I don't know, Ringo Starr, that'll be fine with me. Hopefully, it'll bring you some joy to see my haircut getting worse. What else? Um, Yesterday I got bored enough that I worked out for the first time in a very long time. Still sore. Also, my dog thought that I was in trouble because I was trying to work out, so she climbed all over me and essentially kept licking me, saying that, um, asking if I needed help, essentially. But um, I think that's about it. Kind of busy, um, as I'm sure you all are as well. And hopefully your other CS classes or Gen Ed classes are um, being reasonable when it comes to the workload. I've been sort of keeping posted on Reddit for UMD, seeing how you all have been reacting to some of the work there. And again, I'm going to tell you all that if you feel like something is unfair, um, raise your voice. You're to be honest, you're paying the school for an education. Now, don't be mean about it and approach it from an angle of understanding because your professors are going through some of the same stress that you are. But let them know. If they're making an exam that's too long, doubling the amount of work for you, just because they think that you can work at home. This is probably their first rodeo sort of assigning work, so in that way online. So let them know. Be nice about it, but let them know. Anyway, that's the end of my rant there. But let's jump right into sort of talking about Node and Express, and how we want to get around sort of the annoying parts of Node when it comes to creating a web server. So last time we talked about the module-based structure of Node. We created some events as you're practicing with exercise 4, and you created a web server as well. So bringing up that example, HTTP example. For example, here we created a server. We said if the URL is this, then write and then end. Let's say that also, what if they want to do greeting? Or maybe they want to do, I don't know, name as as part of the URL, the folder that they want to go into. You have to create a separate if statement. You have to write your code inside of there and sort of handle it yourself. And you can keep going on. So as the complexity of your web app grows, you're going to have to essentially have a million if statements for the URL, for which port they're using, for all of these different things, and you're essentially being a lot more hands-on than you typically want to be, because you have to anticipate just about every move when it comes to passing in for information and receiving that information. And this is what we're sort of trying to solve with Express. We want to get around having to deal with all of that and getting our hands dirty with all that sort of stuff. And we want a protocol to be defined for us that we can just call methods and functions and be able to communicate directly with our server rather than having to do all of this different work. I would almost attribute this similar to when we were talking about directly modifying HTML pages versus using React to generate those pages. With HTML, you had to use something like .innerHTML and modify it directly and handle it and anticipate that it's going to overwrite the stuff that is in your file if you do .innerHTML. Versus if you did React, you can render in real time, you can add more components and all that sort of stuff. This is essential. It's going to be very parallel, not similar, but parallel to that when we're dealing with Express and using that to handle our interactions with our web server. So going back to my slides. With the HTTP module, again, we have to handle which port, what event, what address, and it's kind of, as you get even a little bit more complex, it just gets unsustainable for you to be able to handle everything. So this is why we want to use Express, because we just in a general structure for a web app, we have a client and we have a server. HTTP, again, is what we're using to communicate between the client and the server. And that's what we were doing with the HTTP module. So we were telling it which port to read from, what was it looking for? Was it looking for connection, for failure? What address, what response is it going to give back? We are essentially this arrow right here. We are the ones that are looking straight into the HTTP module and handling all that work. And that's not something we want to do. So Express is going to handle that, and some of the other frameworks that you might find out there as well follow a simple structure for handling the interactions between the client and the server that sort of are encapsulated in this acronym right here called REST. So REST is a representational state transfer. It essentially means that it has a predefined convention for having a server communicate with the client. There's really only sort of 4 or 5 different things that you can do with something that is RESTful, as you'll probably see in like YouTube tutorials and things like that. But if you use Express, you're essentially following the same convention. It creates and has its different methods that follow this convention. And the REST sort of convention has these 4 different operations that you can do. And these 4 different operations are the operations that happen between a client and a server, and how it can sort of manipulate the data that's on the server to receive that information. So for example, we can create information, we can read information from the server, we can update information that we may have just received to something that already existed on the server, and of course we can delete the files that are on the server, or whatever information you have on the server. These are the general buckets that make up a RESTful implementation of the interactions between a client and a server. But each individual framework that you may end up using has different ways of handling that, different methods that you can use for that. For specifically HTTP and Express, we're going to be using POST to create, we're going to be using GET to read, PUT to update information, to put it back in there, and delete to delete, as we can sort of see. So when you're dealing with, and if you end up Googling something with Express, you'll see POST or GET or PUT or delete. Or if you even use an API, which is what the next video that I'll probably post tomorrow is going to be about. And let me actually show you, for example. We're going to talk about Yelp and Twitter most likely tomorrow. You'll see here, for example, when you're trying to use an API from a service, you'll see that it'll tell you which protocol you want to use, which action you want to use, and what the actual address to do that action to, so how to interact with that server. So GET is a common one, and it'll be roughly the same with whatever framework you end up using, but for Express specifically, we'll be using its specific methods for each of those. Yeah, I explained it there. All right, so this right here, you just sort of saw when I brought up the Yelp webpage for the API. So what is an API? I'll go into this more in the next video when we actually apply some of the real world examples of using GET. But essentially, it's a server that houses information. Lots of, I can probably tell you most businesses have their own APIs for some sort of information. And it's out there for people like you that if you want to create some sort of application and use their services, you can do so pretty freely. I mean, depending on the service, they might charge you for, I don't know, 5,000 calls to this API, but generally, at least you can use it free for a little bit. And it's because they want you to innovate and create things using their already existing services and servers. So for example, with Twitter, you can you can use the last 7 days, I believe. We'll go over it more once I pull up the example, but I believe it's the last 7 days of tweets. You can search for them. You can look at how many people retweeted, what the information was. For Yelp, for example, we'll talk about searching for businesses, as you can sort of see here. You can search for Korean food. You can search for Salvadoran food. You can do all these different things using their API. So you can, with your web application, submit some sort of request to them using these CRUD operations, and then be able to use that information for whatever you want to do. I can tell you right now that this is probably going to be one of the more useful things. I mean, to be honest, I think the whole semester has been pretty useful if you want to create your own applications, but this is super useful, especially if you decide you want to do a hackathon, or if you want to go to a competition or something like that. You'll just see that at hackathons, at least from my experience, I'm not wearing my Bitcamp shirt right now, but I was earlier. They will just hand you keys to their APIs and just tell you go for it, use it. And they'll create challenges for you using their APIs to create, I don't know, visualize this code from Bloomberg for the stock market, or with Yelp, create the most innovative way of using, I don't know, phone data. I don't know. But there's a million different ways that you can integrate the APIs that they're going to be handing to you. And this is a great way of putting things on your resume and showing that you can take the stuff that you're learning in school and applying it to actual real world stuff and innovating. And hey, you know, if you might end up with a great idea, and if you do, don't forget about me. You're a lowly instructor that doesn't get paid like a professor. I can tell you that right now. If you hit it big, you can just slip me an envelope. I'll give you my address. But anyway, I digress. You can sort of see here that this URL sort of gives you some information. So first we have HTTPS. You can see that this is the protocol that we're using to communicate with this server, api.yelp.com. And that is our URL, essentially. Each of these different folders within it is telling you a different part of that server that you're going to be accessing. So for example here, we're using the third version of this API, and we're specifically searching in the businesses. So even if I take away, businesses here, think of this almost as a hub of information right here that houses all of the businesses that you can access using Yelp. And so you can use post, get, put, and delete on that server with whatever information it has in it. So I can post new information, I can get that information, all that sort of stuff that I've been talking about. So think of this last bit right here, as kind of its own subfolder with all of the information. And so you're essentially just telling that specific subfolder, grab this information, update this information, delete that information. That's essentially it. I know when I was in school, dealing with APIs was kind of, daunting, and it was always super confusing, but I can tell you right now, at its very core, that's essentially what it is. But we use Express essentially to make it easier on us to handle that information. So anyway, what is Express? So again, it's a web application framework for communicating between servers and clients. It rests, going back to REST, on Node, which means that we will have to install it. It's not already there. And it's not super heavy, as in it doesn't take up much space, since it's essentially just another module that tacks on to our existing Node app. It's also super, super popular. Let's see what the Express... no, I don't want that. Let's do Express.js. Let's see if it'll tell me how many times it's been used. You can see sort of here what the reasons are why you want to use it. It's completely free. Let's see if NPM will tell me. There we go. All right. So weekly downloads 12 million. So you can already see it's super, super popular. And here's just a quick example. It won't look much different from what we've been doing with Node, to be honest. But as we get, again, more complicated, it'll make it super easy for us to communicate with a server or an API. All right, let's go back to my slides, because I'm essentially going to be covering just about everything in that tutorial there. So how to use. When we are in our folder, we just want to do npm I, which stands for install, Express, and it'll already know what you're talking about and install those modules in that folder that you're currently in. So we create our folder the normal way that we do for Node. So it's essentially a normal folder, files inside of it. Once you navigate in there using your command prompt, then you just do npm I Express. It'll install everything in there and you're good to go. Once you're in there, as you sort of saw in that example that I just pulled up on the Express website, you essentially just require Express, and then Express is the, function constructor, depending on how you want to think of it. And then you essentially create an instance of it by doing Express. I'm hesitant to call it actually a constructor, just because you won't be using new. It's just a function, and so it's assigning it to this thing app, and then app is what we can use to assign the port, use the get, post, all those different things that we're going to end up using. So super easy, to be honest, especially if you've already sort of dealt with and have already gotten annoyed by using HTTP, the built-in HTTP module with Node. This will be, I shouldn't say cakewalk, but a little bit easier. Last thing I want to talk about, especially specifically with Express, and I'm missing a curly brace or parentheses there. One thing to keep in mind. So I said earlier that there were 5 different ways of interacting, and there's only 4 here, and that is because depending on the different action that you're doing, you can do it with one thing or multiple items. So for post, put, and delete, we can only do that one for one item, as you can sort of assume why. You only want to post one thing at a time. You only want to put update one thing at a time because it's specific, or delete one thing at a time. Versus get, I can use get to retrieve only one item or entry, but I can also use it to get everything. So for example here, if I go back to my URL, I deleted a part of this, partially for this example, because business is here, right? Think of that as that file system that we're accessing information with using HTTP and our REST operations, our CRUD operations using our REST protocol. We can delete stuff in business. We can delete one thing, or we can update one thing using put. We can add something using post. But when it comes to get, I can get all businesses if I want to, or I can just get one specific entry as well. That seems like it's a small thing, but to be honest, it'll come in handy a little bit later where, let's say you want all of the information versus just one, that it sort of gives it up to you. So technically there's 5 different operations, but it looks like 4 because get kind of double dips in that sense. All right. I think that's about it for slides for basic Express stuff, mostly because I want to switch into creating an example here. So I'm just in Visual Studio right now. Let me actually go over here. Let's do Documents. Let's create a new folder. Let's do New Folder. Probably should have done this earlier. 420 examples. It's lit. And then I'm going to open that folder in here. Actually, let's just do this. This is me testing out some awesome Yelp stuff that we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Can't use a space apparently. There we go. Documents D4. Oops. 4. Good. Okay, and then now I'm just gonna do. This is a quick shortcut if you want to be able to use it. Code dot. This will open Visual Studio Code in this specific folder that you're currently in. Comes in handy. Wish I had tried it out before or shown you before. All right, so we opened it up. There's nothing in there. I'm just going to create a file here, and I'm going to call it express example.js. All right, now first things first, going back to our instructions on how to use. We have to install Express in order for us to be able to use it. So I'm going to go back to my command line here, and I'm going to run exactly that operation that I wrote right there. If you're on a Mac, you might have to use sudo before you do npm, so sudo npm iexpress. In my case, I'm on Windows, so I'm just going to do npm iexpress. Let's hope it doesn't take too long. Okay, perfect. Oh, no such file. We should commit this file. Added. Okay. I think it should have worked just fine. It added the packages properly. Save error. Yeah, I think this is just something it's warning me about. That's fine. Okay, so now let's go back. And now that we have it installed, we can go ahead and try an example. So as I said before, we can just start with our back here. Start with importing it and actually assigning it and creating a call to the function for Express. So const express equals require express. All right. Also, you can go see over here that the node modules are in here. So that's how you know you installed it properly. But const express, and then let me create an instance. Let me just do const server equals express. There we go. So that's our quick handy-dandy example. Now, let's go ahead and try something real quick and create a server that we can sort of use. So I'm going to go ahead and do, let's do this. Yeah, let's do this example. All right, so let's go ahead and do app dot, oops, not app. That's my example. Server dot get, and I'm going to get this, and I'll explain what it is in a moment. And I will create a function here that will then, request, comma, response as usual, and I'm going to do response dot send. Hi. All right, so essentially what this is saying is when our server gets a call to this specific address, so I could say something a little more specific. Right now I'm just doing slash. So this means when it gets to whatever port or whatever URL we're going to be using. Then it's going to call this function. It's going to have a request or a response. In this case, the response that I'm sending back here is just hi. So it should just print hi. Before I do anything else, I have to make sure that I tell it exactly where to write that information to. So I'm going to do server.listen 3000, comma, and in here, actually, I won't put anything just yet. I'm just going to say. All right, so let's go back to our command line, and I'm just going to run our code right here. So I'm just going to do node and the name of my file, express example, and let's see what happens. Okay, nothing. Let's see if maybe if I run. There we go. So it won't tell you anything, which is kind of annoying. I know that before it at least would give you some information, especially if we were running stuff in React. So anytime that you are running a server, it probably makes some sense to just console.log something so that somebody knows that it has actually connected. So what you can do over here is you can add a comma and you can just write a function in there. Actually, just for the sake of it, let me use an arrow function. I'm just going to do function, and in here, I'm just going to console.log our where we're connecting. So connected to port 3000. Okay, go back here. Just gonna stop it, run it again, and you see it says connected to port 3000, and that's how you know that it's connecting. So it's always good practice just to make sure that you have some sort of feedback for somebody so that they're not just waiting. And you can see again, just to walk you through it a little bit. Essentially what I did here was I created my instance of Express, and I said, when we get a request to this specific location, which essentially what this specific, that's not it. That specific location, the slash, is just localhost 3000. It just means just at that port. Then run this function, which has been essentially responds with hi. And the response is going to be pasted right here. Now over here, essentially we said, the server is going to listen to port 3000, and at that point, it's going to console.log connected to port 3000, which is what we saw over here. So you kind of need both things hand in hand, and these, again, is very similar to what we did with HTTP, where you're telling it where to look for and what the response is going to be. And just to refresh your memory again, each of these two things, this function here and this function here, even though one is an arrow and one is kind of a normal function, those are both callback functions. So when that actual process happens, that is what's going to be called to run based on some of the parameters that might be there, so request or response. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. Right now I'm just doing some very basic Express stuff. So you'll see another video, the next video, where we'll get a little bit more nitty gritty and scale this up a little bit to be a little more useful. Last example I want to show here, just to show you that this sort of URL here tacks on to the end. I'm just going to say if the server.gets the greeting, then it's going to respond with hi, and the server is then going to listen at port 3000 and say console.log connected to port 3000. So if I run this again, let me quit it out. Again, Control-C is what you can use to quit out. I'm going to run it again, Now you can see connected. Now if I go over here, if I refresh this, if I do slash, oh wait, hold on. That's why it's not working. I didn't save my file. There we go. Okay, so if I do this again, run it, connected to port 3000, refresh. You can see here, it says cannot get. Why can it not get? Why can't it get? There we go. Because I changed this URL, because again, this is what is being tacked on to the port. So we're saying we're at port 3000 and tacking on this /greeting. So if I add that on here, greeting, now it gives me pi. So sort of intuitive, tells you everything you need to know right there. Let me check my notes, see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about specifically with get. I think that's about it. Now, we're going to talk about some of the other functions definitely next week. So for example, put and post and delete we are going to deal with next week. Because next week we are also going to talk about Postman and sort of simulating an API and doing our post and put requests as if we were running a server and managing those files on our computer. So hang tight for those. And again, there will be a next video where we'll talk about get and we'll actually apply it. You'll see I have a million file tabs up here. But we'll be using Twitter's API and Yelp's API, and we're going to be actually using the get function that we just talked about in Express. We're going to go a little more in depth and also talk about how to actually get information from a public API so that you can be able to use this in your own time. So that will be in the next video that I will post. If you're watching this tonight for some reason, I will post tomorrow. And if you're watching this on Tuesday, then it should already be posted because I'll probably post it in the morning. So let me know if you have any questions. Please keep posting on Piazza. And I think that's about it for now. This pretty easy first video. Make sure that you can recreate what I just talked about. And that way you should be good to go. All right. I will see you in the next video and take care.